This right here is the two-piece Wusthof Gourmet starter set. It includes an 8-inch chef's knife, as well as a 4-inch utility knife. And the entire point of this is to really cover 80% of the kitchen tasks that you're going to want to do. A few notes about the Wusthof Gourmet. Wusthof is essentially one of the higher-end German brands out there. Very, very well known. They've been in business for, I think, about over 200 years, actually. And the Gourmet line is their entry-level knife line. So obviously their classic and their icon are very well known, and they've really upgraded those throughout the few years. But this is meant to be a more entry-level knife to compete with some of the more entry-level knives out there and sort of widen their net a little bit. So in order to do that, they've actually cut costs in a lot of ways. First things first, this is actually a stamped knife. As you might be able to tell, it's not forged, even though they try to make the bolster look a little bit like it is forged. So it's rolled and it's essentially cut out of a single sheet of metal. They use their own sort of brand of metal, and it's actually a 58 hardness, which is not as sharp as a lot of the higher end knives, but it's definitely not as soft as knives like Global or Victorinox. So it's a nice little middle ground. It's pretty tough, but not so tough that, it's going to increase the cost a lot. At the same time, the blade is actually cut to a relatively clunky 18.5 degrees on each side, compared to, let's say, 16 degrees on a Shun, or 15 degrees on a Global, or even the 14-ish degrees that the classic line from Wusthof is. So it's definitely not as sharp as a knife as a lot of the other brands out there, and that's one thing you're going to want to consider. On top of that, like I said, this is a stamped knife, so there's really nothing going on in terms of protection of the steel. It's just a solid piece of steel that's been ground down. There's no Damascus finish or anything along those lines either. Both of these knives do have full tangs, and that's important to note because some of their knives, especially the much smaller ones, do not. So aside from that, that's sort of the point of this knife. I will say that off the bat, my thoughts are that it's definitely a nice knife. It's definitely a good knife. I do think it's a little bit raw of a knife. You can see when you look at the edge that it's sort of ground down using a relatively coarse grit. It's not polished like a lot of other knives are. And other than that, though, the entire knife is pretty solid. It's sort of a light knife because it is stamped, but it is a high quality knife. I think if you want a German knife, if you're okay with having a less sharp blade, see, like with a Shun, this would have been cutting me by now, but with this knife, it's not. And it's not really a shaving sharp either out of the box, but it's still a good knife. I would say, however, that my personal choice is always the Shun Sora for an entry-level knife set, and this is priced similarly to the Shun Sora. That's a forged knife. It has lifetime free sharpening. It's made of VG10 steel, which is 61 hardness. I'll put a link down to both of them below. If you guys have any questions or comments or concerns, let me know. But otherwise, I will talk to you very soon.